I'm taken, she flashed her ring. The Alpha King ripped it off. Not anymore. The kingdom of Eldrath had always been a land of shadows and whispers. Its towers rose like dark fingers into the stormy skies, and the wind carried the echo of old curses that even kings dared not speak aloud. Lady Seraphine walked the cobbled streets of the capital city, her cloak drawn tightly around her, hiding the tremor that ran through her hands. Today was not an ordinary day. Today she was to show her allegiance, her loyalty, and her binding to a noble she barely knew, a man she was meant to marry because of duty, not love. Her heart, however, belonged elsewhere. It belonged to a dream she had long carried in secret, one she had never spoken aloud. But duty, it seemed, always demanded sacrifice. Seraphine's family had arranged this marriage for reasons that mixed politics, power, and fear. The noble she was promised, Lord Alaric, was respected for his cunning and feared for his temper. Yet her own heart recoiled at the thought of pledging herself to him. The coronation of the new Alpha King was a spectacle that drew nobles from across Eldrath. Seraphine entered the grand hall with the elegance of someone trained to move through fear, as if it were part of her nature. The hall was vast, its walls carved with scenes of past victories and magical battles, the floors polished so that every torch flicker reflected like molten gold. Her ring, a symbol of her engagement, gleamed on her finger. She lifted her hand to show it, to declare to the Alpha King and the court that she was already claimed. For a moment the hall went silent. Not a noble stirred, even the servants paused, and then he stepped forward, the Alpha King. He moved like a shadow walking on air, his dark cloak brushing the floor. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, held a dangerous intensity. Every step he took seemed to bend the room to his will, and yet there was something in him that made Seraphine's chest tighten, not with fear, not entirely, but with a strange fascination. Without a word, the king reached out and tore the ring from her finger. It was a motion both violent and deliberate, a gesture that shook the air. "Not anymore," he said, his voice low, echoing like thunder against the hall's stone walls. Gasps filled the air. Seraphine felt her heart leap into her throat. The ring had been her symbol of safety, of belonging, of control in a world that demanded obedience, and now it was gone. She stared at him, disbelief and anger clashing within her. "You, how dare you?" she exclaimed, her voice quivering even as she tried to sound firm. The king merely regarded her, a shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "Rules do not bind me," he said simply, "nor does what others wish for you. You belong to no one but yourself if you dare to claim it." Seraphine's blood ran cold, yet hot at the same time. The sheer audacity of the act, the way he had defied every expectation of her world, was both terrifying and thrilling. She did not understand the pull she felt toward him, the whisper of curiosity that slid into the cracks of her fear. Lord Alaric, watching from the sidelines, turned pale. His calm mask of authority cracked as he clenched his fists. The ring was not just a symbol, it was his claim, and the king had taken it. The Alpha King, sensing the tension, stepped back into the shadows, letting the murmurs of the court rise. Seraphine's eyes followed him, wide with a mixture of anger, fear, and confusion. She did not know why, but a small part of her wanted to chase him, to demand the ring back. Another part of her, one she did not fully understand, wanted to kneel, to surrender, to see what power he truly held. The rest of the coronation passed in a blur. Seraphine moved through it like a ghost, her mind tangled in questions she could not answer. How had he dared to do such a thing? Why did it feel as if a part of her had been wrenched free along with the ring? And what did he mean when he said she belonged to herself? By nightfall, the city was cloaked in mist and shadow. The streets, usually bustling with lantern-lit activity, were nearly empty. Seraphine wandered along the river that cut through Eldrath, the dark waters reflecting the pale light of the moon. Her hands reached for the ring she no longer wore, fingers brushing empty air. Her heart ached in a way she could not name, a longing for something she had not yet understood. The wind carried whispers from the towers above, voices of old kings and queens, of lovers torn apart by magic and duty. The Alpha King's words haunted her. "You belong to no one but yourself." Seraphine's steps faltered. She had spent her life following rules, obeying duty, and carrying the expectations of those who claimed to care for her. Yet in that one gesture, the tearing of a ring, her world had shifted. She could feel the boundaries of her life bending, as if the walls themselves of Eldrath were waiting to see which path she would choose. A sudden rustle behind her made her spin. There, standing on the edge of the mist, was a figure cloaked in darkness. Her breath caught. The Alpha King. He held the ring now, dangling it between his fingers like a prize, yet there was a softness in his gaze she had not expected. "You are thinking too small, Lady Seraphine," he said. "Do not let duty blind you. Do not let fear make your choices for you." I do not understand," she whispered. "Why me? Why now?" He stepped closer, the mist swirling around him like liquid shadow. "Because you are more than what they believe, and because the world is changing, whether you are ready or not." She wanted to step back to demand her safety, to assert her independence, but the pull was too strong. A dangerous curiosity, like fire behind her ribs, urged her forward. She wanted answers, though she feared them. She wanted to know him, though she feared what she might discover. "The ring," she said, her voice trembling. "Give it back, you cannot just—" "I can," he interrupted, his tone firm but not cruel. "And I have. It is not yours, not anymore. It never truly was. It is a symbol of choice, and today you must begin to choose for yourself." Seraphine's mind spun. Every lesson she had learned about obedience, about duty, about what it meant to be a lady in Eldrath, screamed in protest. Yet beneath it, a quiet truth began to emerge. She had never had the chance to make a real choice before. The king had ripped away the symbol of her forced allegiance, and for the first time she glimpsed freedom. But freedom was terrifying, and she did not yet trust herself with it. "You are dangerous," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know if I can trust you." The king's storm-colored eyes softened for a moment, revealing a trace of something ancient and sorrowful. "Trust is not given," he said. "It is taken. If you ever wish to take it, you will know where to find me." With that, he turned, vanishing into the mist as silently as he had appeared. Seraphine stood alone, the wind tugging at her cloak, her heart still racing. The city felt emptier now, and yet somehow fuller. Her thoughts returned to the ring. She could no longer see it, but its absence felt like a spark, a reminder that the life she had lived until now, the life of rules and obligations, was ending. Something new, something dangerous, and perhaps something wonderful was beginning. As she made her way back to her chambers, she could not shake the feeling that eyes were following her from the shadows. Not hostile eyes, but watchful, waiting, curious. And deep inside, Seraphine knew nothing in Eldrath would ever be the same again. The night carried her thoughts like a river carries driftwood. She could hear faint whispers from the towers above, old voices murmuring prophecies she barely understood. The Alpha King had done more than take a ring. He had torn open a part of her she did not yet know existed. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, its cry mingling with the wind. A warning or an invitation, she did not know, but she knew one thing for certain: she could not turn back. The first step toward a new world had been taken, and the kingdom of Eldrath waited with bated breath for what she would do next. And as she gazed into the black waters of the river, a single thought rose in her mind. Not anymore. Not ever again. I choose for myself. The moon shone coldly above, and in its light, shadows danced across the walls, as if the world itself acknowledged that a change had begun. A storm was coming, both outside and within, and Seraphine, for the first time in her life, felt the thrill of standing on the edge of it, ready, for better or worse, to step forward. The city of Eldrath was quiet after the stormy night when the Alpha King had taken her ring. Lady Seraphine moved carefully through its misted streets, her mind still echoing with the words he had spoken. "You belong to no one but yourself." They were both freeing and frightening, like a key turning in a lock she had never dared to touch. She could not stop thinking about him, the way he moved through shadows as if the dark obeyed him, the storm-colored eyes that seemed to see everything, even the parts of herself she had hidden from the world. Yet she was not foolish. She knew the Alpha King was dangerous. Nobles whispered of his power over spirits and magic, of curses that followed him like shadows that never left his side. To be near him was to invite peril. And still, Seraphine felt the pull of curiosity, stronger than fear. She could not resist it. Days passed, and the kingdom was alive with preparation for the Alpha King's court gatherings. The grand hall where nobles came to pay homage and trade secrets was filled with the scent of candles, parchment, and expensive perfume. Seraphine had been summoned. Her heart pounded as she walked the path to the palace, her steps echoing on the polished stone floor. When she entered, the king was already there, standing tall at the center of the room. His presence made the other nobles shrink slightly into the shadows, their whispers dying down. He turned his stormy eyes toward her, and she felt both drawn and defiant. "You have come," he said simply, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made the air tremble. I did not know I had a choice," Seraphine replied, her voice firmer than she expected. "You always have a choice," he said. "You only forget it when others demand obedience. Today I remind you." Seraphine's stomach twisted. His words felt like both a challenge and an invitation. She had never been tested like this before. To trust him would be reckless, yet to turn away felt wrong. The court proceedings began, but Seraphine found it impossible to focus. She noticed how the king's presence commanded the room without force. Nobles fell silent when he entered, and even the servants moved as if anticipating his will. It was as if the very air of Eldrath bent to his shadow. During a break, Seraphine was summoned to the private garden, a hidden place behind the castle walls. She had heard stories of the garden. It was said that rare flowers grew only under the moonlight, and that the whispers of spirits could be heard if one listened carefully. The king was already there when she arrived. He stood beside a marble fountain, the water reflecting the moonlight. "You are brave to come," he said, his tone gentle now, almost tender. "Most would not dare. Why do you test me?" she asked. "Why draw me into your shadows?" He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Because strength is born in shadows," he said. "Because desire is discovered when you face the unknown, and because I need you to see the truth of your own heart." Seraphine's pulse quickened. The truth of her heart. She had never spoken it aloud. She had never allowed herself to even think it fully, and now, standing before him, she felt her carefully guarded walls trembling. "You are unlike anyone I have met," she whispered. "I do not understand why you seek me." "I do not seek you for myself," he said. "I seek the part of you you have not yet claimed, the part that is yours alone, but it is fragile, it must be tested." Her thoughts swirled. His words were both frightening and electrifying. She wanted to resist, to run back to the safety of her obligations, but the pull was too strong. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, her mind racing with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Over the following days, Seraphine was drawn deeper into the king's world. She learned of the magic that flowed through Eldrath like blood through veins, of curses that could bind souls, and of ancient prophecies that spoke of a woman of noble blood who could change the fate of the kingdom. With each revelation, she felt both awe and fear. One evening, the king led her to a chamber filled with mirrors. Each reflected a different part of Eldrath's history: battles, celebrations, betrayals, and secrets. "These are the echoes of what has been," he said softly. "And these," he gestured toward one mirror that shimmered oddly, "are the possibilities of what may come." Seraphine approached the mirror. Inside, she saw herself not as she was, but as she could be. Strong, confident, unafraid. The reflection held her gaze, daring her to step closer. And then, as she reached out, a spectral figure appeared behind her reflection, Alaric, her betrothed, trapped in the mirrored world, his eyes pleading, her breath caught. "Alaric," she whispered, What is this?" The king stepped beside her. "A test," he said. "You cannot save him without risking yourself. The choice is yours. Do you act from duty or do you act from the truth of your heart?" Seraphine's mind raced. She wanted to reach in to save him, but fear clawed at her. What if she failed? What if the mirror trapped her instead? And yet something in her stirred courage, a determination that had lain dormant for years. I will try," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. She stepped forward and touched the glass. A cold shock ran through her fingers, and she felt herself pulled into a world of mist and shadow. The mirror showed her visions of the kingdom in chaos, curses running wild, spirits whispering threats, nobles plotting in darkness. She saw herself as both powerless and powerful, a single choice capable of tipping the balance. And always, Alaric's pleading eyes followed her, a reminder of duty and the past she had never truly wanted. The king's voice echoed in her mind, calm and steady. "Do not act from fear, act from understanding." Understanding. Seraphine took a deep breath. She realized that saving Alaric was not her task, not fully. Her task was to claim her own strength, to navigate the shadows and find her path. Only then could she truly influence the outcome, and only then could she make choices without being bound by fear or expectation. With a surge of determination, she withdrew her hand. The spectral figure of Alaric shimmered and faded, leaving her alone in the mirror world. Yet she felt no defeat. Instead, she felt power, her own power, quiet and steady, awakening inside her. When she emerged from the mirrors, the king was waiting. He studied her carefully, his stormy eyes unreadable. "You are learning," he said. Do not underestimate what you have begun to discover. Seraphine met his gaze. I understand more than I did, she admitted, but I am not ready to trust everything or everyone. He nodded. You do not need to, only yourself. And one day, perhaps, you will see that trust is not weakness but strength. The moon rose higher, casting silver light over the garden. The night was quiet, yet Seraphine could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the kingdom's magic alive around her. She sensed that the Alpha King's interest in her was more than curiosity, more than a test. He had plans, and she was now part of them, whether she wished to be or not. In the following weeks, she was drawn repeatedly into the court and the shadows of the palace. Every encounter with the king left her unsettled, aware of her own feelings and afraid of them. Yet she could not deny the pull, the fascination that grew, dangerous and thrilling. She began to see glimpses of his humanity, moments when his stern exterior softened, when he showed patience, and when he spoke quietly of burdens he bore long before she arrived. But with every step closer to understanding him, she felt the tension of her obligations tug at her. Alaric's name haunted her. The world of duty, marriage, and expectation pressed against her heart, reminding her that choices carried consequences. And all the while, Eldrath itself seemed to respond. Storms rose without warning, shadows shifted in corners, and whispers from old curses hinted that time was not on her side. One night, the king led her to the palace's highest tower. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of rain and ancient stone. Below, the city spread like a river of lights, calm yet alive with secrets. Everything you see, he said, has been shaped by choices made long before your birth. And everything you touch now will shape what is yet to come. Are you ready for that? Seraphine swallowed, the wind tangling her hair. I do not know, she admitted. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Then learn, he said. Learn who you are and what you can endure. Only then will you understand why I act as I do, and why I need you to act as you will. The tower trembled slightly, as if echoing his words, and in that trembling, Seraphine felt the weight of possibility. She was no longer merely a pawn in Eldrath's games. She was awakening to power she had not known she possessed, and to a bond with the Alpha King that was both terrifying and compelling. As she looked out over the kingdom, the storm above reflecting in her eyes, she realized that her life had changed forever. Shadows were gathering, secrets were rising, and her heart was no longer her own. But perhaps, for the first time, that was exactly how it should be. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper reached her. The choice is yours, Lady Seraphine. Choose wisely. The night held its breath, and Eldrath waited. The first light of dawn touched the towers of Eldrath, casting pale gold upon its dark stone walls. Lady Seraphine walked through the palace gardens, the dew soaking her shoes, her thoughts tangled in the events of the past weeks. She had begun to see the Alpha King in ways she had never imagined. Not merely as a ruler, not merely as a danger, but as a man whose burdens weighed on him as heavily as the kingdom itself. Yet the memory of Alaric, the betrothed she had never truly loved, haunted her still. Her heart was a battlefield. The Alpha King had been absent since the night of the tower, leaving her to her own reflection and choices. Yet she could feel his influence everywhere. In the shifting shadows, in the wind that whispered through the trees, in the quiet moments when the castle seemed to breathe like a living thing. Each encounter with him left her unsettled, a mixture of fear and fascination tightening in her chest. She paused by a marble fountain in the center of the garden, the water shimmering in the morning light. It reflected more than her image, it reflected her uncertainties. She raised her hand to touch the surface, as though reaching for answers hidden beneath the rippling reflection. You are thinking too deeply again. Seraphine started and turned sharply. The Alpha King stood just beyond the fountain, his cloak catching the light like a storm cloud. He had that way of appearing suddenly, silently, as if he had stepped out from the very shadows themselves. I am trying to understand, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Everything about you, about this kingdom. It is too much. He came closer, his dark eyes gentle now, revealing a glimpse of something hidden beneath the storm, the weight of responsibility, the loneliness that came with being the Alpha King. Understanding does not come at once, he said softly. It comes step by step, and each step requires courage. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to retreat, to remind herself that he was dangerous, that the palace and its secrets were not hers to claim. But something in her stirred, a quiet rebellion against fear, a spark of defiance that grew stronger with every step he took toward her. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why involve me in everything, the magic, the shadows, the power you carry?" He paused, the morning light catching the edges of his sharp features. "Because you are more than you believe. You carry a strength that can change the fate of Eldrath, and because no one else could endure what I will ask of you." The words sent a shiver through her. She had never been asked to endure anything beyond her narrow life of etiquette, lessons, and obedience. And now, standing here, she felt the weight of possibility pressing down on her. Days passed, and the palace's atmosphere grew tense. Eldrath was a kingdom alive with magic and whispers, and Seraphine was beginning to understand that power could be both a shield and a weapon. She practiced with the subtle spells woven into the palace's history, learning to sense currents of energy and the murmurs of old curses. Each lesson left her drained, yet exhilarated. One evening the king summoned her to the Hall of Shadows, a place few were allowed to enter. The room was vast, lit only by flickering torches, the walls covered in tapestries that told of battles and betrayals centuries old. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested an ancient book bound in dark leather. "This book," the king said, his voice low, "holds knowledge of the old magic that flows through Eldrath. It also holds truths you must face." Seraphine stepped closer, her hand hovering over the book. A strange energy pulsed from it, like the heartbeat of the kingdom itself. "What truths?" she asked, feeling both curiosity and dread. "The truth of your heart," he replied, "and the truth of the choices you must make. You cannot serve only duty, nor can you serve only desire. You must learn to balance both, or everything will be lost." Her hands trembled as she opened the book. Pages whispered secrets of Eldrath's past, curses that had been cast in rage, alliances formed in shadow, sacrifices made in the name of love and loyalty. She read of a woman of noble blood who could awaken the latent magic of the kingdom, a woman whose courage could bend fate itself. Her own name was not written, yet the words felt directed at her, like a mirror held up to her soul. The king observed her silently, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he spoke again. "You are beginning to understand, but knowledge alone is not enough. Action is required, and sometimes it demands more than you think you can give." Seraphine looked up, meeting his eyes. The storm in them was tempered by something softer now, something human. "And if I fail?" she asked, her voice trembling. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat from his presence. "Then you learn," he said. "And you try again. There is no shame in failure, only in surrender." The words resonated deep within her. She had lived a life of surrender, of quiet obedience. But now, with this man, this Alpha King, she felt the stirrings of something new, courage born from uncertainty, and the first hints of desire for a life she could shape herself. That night she could not sleep. The city was quiet, but the palace seemed alive with whispers and shadows. She wandered to the tower where the moonlight poured through the tall windows. Her thoughts returned to the mirror, to the spectral figure of Alaric, and to the storm-colored eyes of the king. Her heart was fractured, torn between duty, fear, and the strange pull she felt toward him. Suddenly a figure appeared behind her. He had the quiet, inevitable presence of one who moves as if the world bends around him. The Alpha King. "You think too much," he said softly. "Your mind is alive with questions, but your heart is where truth lies." She turned to face him, words caught in her throat. She wanted to speak of fear, of duty, of Alaric, but he silenced her with a raised hand. "Do not speak," he said. "Listen, feel. Only then will you understand the power you carry." Seraphine felt the tension in her chest tighten, yet she could not step back. She felt drawn toward him, not just by curiosity, but by the weight of something greater, responsibility, destiny, and a bond that was forming between them, silent but undeniable. He held out a hand. "Come with me," he said. "I will show you what it means to face the shadows and to claim the light within them." Together, they walked through hidden corridors of the palace, corridors lined with ancient stone, flickering torches casting elongated shadows. The king's hand brushed hers at times, light and fleeting, yet it sent warmth through her that she could not ignore. Every step deeper into the palace's heart made her more aware of her own power and more aware of the tension growing between them. They arrived at a hidden chamber, a place of magic and ritual. Symbols were carved into the floor, candles burned in protective circles, and the air was thick with the scent of incense. "Tonight," the king said. You face a choice. Not for duty, not for obligation, but for yourself. Only then will you begin to understand the bond we share. Seraphine swallowed. Her heart raced. The shadows of the chamber seemed alive, whispering secrets she could not yet hear. What do I have to do?" she asked. "Look within," he said simply. "Face what you fear, face what you desire. Only then can you act with true strength." The ritual began. Candles flickered, shadows danced along the walls, and Seraphine closed her eyes. She felt her fears rising, the fear of failing, the fear of desire, the fear of the choices she must make. And then she felt the pull of courage, small but persistent, guiding her toward understanding. Visions rose before her eyes. The city in chaos, spirits whispering threats, Alaric trapped in shadows, and the Alpha King facing battles she could barely imagine. Each vision carried a lesson. Fear cannot guide action, and duty cannot blind the heart. Her own power flowed through her, quiet and steady, a thread linking past and future. When she opened her eyes, the chamber was silent. The king watched her, his expression softer now, approving. "You are learning," he said, "but this is only the beginning. The choices you make now will shape not only your life, but the life of Eldrath itself." Seraphine's chest heaved, her mind racing. She had glimpsed the truth of her own heart, yet the path ahead was uncertain. She realized that trust would not come easily, not with him, not with herself, not with the kingdom pressing against her. As the dawn approached, she stepped from the chamber into the first light of morning. The wind carried the scent of rain and earth, and the city stretched below her like a living thing. She knew that the Alpha King had changed her world forever. She had begun to awaken, to claim her power, and to see the bond forming between them, not of possession, but of mutual challenge and understanding. But with awakening came danger. Shadows moved in the corners of the city, curses whispered in the wind, and nobles plotted in silence. She realized that the choices she would make next could save or doom Eldrath, and the Alpha King, he was both her guide and her greatest challenge. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, came a whisper that made her heart tighten. "The night is not yet over, Lady Seraphine, and the shadows are growing." Her pulse quickened. The world had shifted beneath her feet. She could no longer turn back. The sky over Eldrath had darkened once more, heavy clouds swirling like restless spirits above the towering castle. Lady Seraphine stood at the edge of the palace battlements, her cloak whipping in the wind. She could feel the city below her, alive with tension. Shadows had begun to gather across Eldrath, whispers of old curses returning, and a strange, uneasy magic spreading through the streets. It was as if the kingdom itself sensed the storm that was coming. Beside her, the Alpha King watched silently. His storm-colored eyes reflected both the threat before them and a rare moment of vulnerability. For weeks, Seraphine had witnessed his fear, his pain, and the loneliness behind his commanding presence. He was a man shaped by duty, power, and shadow, but she had begun to see the threads of humanity beneath the armor of his title. "You are ready," he said quietly, his voice carrying over the wind. Seraphine met his gaze. "Ready? I do not know if I am ready for what is coming." He stepped closer, his hand brushing briefly against hers. "No one is ever truly ready," he said. "Courage is not the absence of fear, it is action despite fear, and you have learned courage in ways few ever do." Her heart tightened at the contact. She had been afraid of him, afraid of what he represented, and yet something had grown between them, an understanding that transcended words. She felt the pull of his presence, both terrifying and comforting, and for the first time she realized she could face him not as a pawn, not as a subject, but as an equal. The ground trembled below, and the air thickened with the scent of burning earth and magic. From the horizon, the shadows rose, dark, twisting figures that moved like smoke, creatures born from old curses long thought dormant. Eldrath itself seemed to shiver as the danger approached. "Seraphine," the king said, his voice steady despite the tremor of his surroundings. "Everything we have prepared for comes to this moment. You must trust yourself as I trust you." She nodded, feeling a strength that had grown inside her in the days and nights of learning, of facing visions, and of walking through shadows. She knew what she must do. The power she had discovered, the courage she had claimed, would guide her now. Together, they stepped forward, leading the people of Eldrath into the courtyard where the shadows had gathered. The citizens trembled, some crying, others clutching talismans or chanting prayers, but all looked to their rulers for guidance. Seraphine felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but it no longer crushed her. It sharpened her focus. The first wave of shadow creatures surged forward, and the Alpha King raised his hands, commanding the currents of magic that flowed through Eldrath. Sparks of light and shadow collided in the air, and the battleground became a dance of power and danger. Seraphine took her place beside him, her own magic awakening fully. She called on the currents within her, directing them with a confidence she had never known. Together, they moved as one. The king's power was fierce, commanding, and overwhelming, but Seraphine's was steady, precise, and guided by understanding. They defended the citizens, banishing the shadows with force and control, yet always careful to protect life rather than destroy it recklessly. As the battle raged, Seraphine saw the reflection of her own growth. She was no longer the frightened noblewoman who had trembled when her ring was torn away. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had faced fear, desire, and power, and had claimed her place in the world. The shadows faltered under their combined strength, retreating as dawn's first light began to break over the city. The storm clouds dissipated, and the castle stood resilient, untouched by the darkness that had threatened to consume it. Eldrath had survived not by the strength of one, but by the courage of two who had learned to trust each other and themselves. When the last of the shadows vanished, silence fell over the courtyard. The citizens watched their rulers, awe and gratitude shining in their eyes. Seraphine's chest heaved, not from exhaustion alone, but from the intensity of what she had accomplished. She had acted from understanding, from courage, from the truth of her heart. The Alpha King turned to her, his expression softening. "You have done more than I could have hoped," he said. "You faced fear, you embraced power, and you have shown the heart of Eldrath itself." Seraphine looked at him, her own eyes reflecting both relief and newfound respect. "We did it together," she said. I never could have done this alone." He reached out, taking her hand fully this time, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged through trials, shadows, and trust. "No," he said. "Not alone, and not as rulers, but as partners. The kingdom may bow to us, but our hearts, they must never be forced. They must choose freely." Her throat tightened, emotion rising in her chest. She had feared submission, feared losing herself to duty or to power. And yet, in this moment, she realized that choosing him, choosing herself, and choosing the kingdom was not a loss of freedom. It was an awakening. Days turned into weeks, and the kingdom began to heal. Eldrath's people rebuilt what had been broken, guided by the wisdom and power of their rulers. Seraphine walked the halls of the palace with a confidence that had once been unimaginable. She visited the Hall of Mirrors, no longer afraid of what they might show, for she understood now that reflection is not fear, it is clarity. Alaric, once the symbol of her duty-bound past, had been released from the lingering shadow magic that had trapped him in the mirror. He left Eldrath quietly, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement that Seraphine no longer belonged to obligation, but to her own path. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in gold and crimson, the Alpha King led her to the palace gardens, the place where they had first begun to test her courage. The air was calm, the flowers glowing softly in the twilight. "You have claimed your power," he said. "You have faced fear, embraced courage, and learned the truth of your heart. You are no longer the same woman who trembled when her ring was torn away." Seraphine smiled, a mixture of relief, pride, and a quiet joy. "I am not," she admitted. "And I choose to be more than I ever thought I could. Not for duty, not for fear, but for myself and for us." The king's eyes softened, and he lifted her hand, placing the ring back upon her finger, but this time it was different. It was not a symbol of possession, but of partnership, of trust, and of freedom. "Then the kingdom and our hearts are aligned," he said, his voice carrying the quiet triumph of someone who had found balance in shadow and light. The wind stirred through the gardens, carrying the scent of rain-soaked flowers. Seraphine felt the pulse of Eldrath itself, a heartbeat intertwined with her own. She looked up at the Alpha King, and for the first time she saw not a ruler shaped by fear and power, but a man who had earned her trust, respect, and perhaps quietly, inevitably, her affection. The days that followed were peaceful, yet alive with the quiet thrill of responsibility and choice. The kingdom flourished, guided by rulers who understood both power and compassion, duty and desire. Seraphine continued to grow into her role, confident and strong, no longer afraid of the shadows that had once threatened to consume her. One night, as they walked together along the balcony of the highest tower, Seraphine looked out over the city, the lights twinkling like stars mirrored on earth. The kingdom is safe, she said softly. For now. The king placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip reassuring, grounding. For now, he echoed. But remember, Eldrath is alive. Shadows will always return. But we will always face them together. Seraphine smiled, feeling a quiet warmth in her chest. She had faced fear, embraced her power, and found her voice. She had walked through shadows and discovered light, not alone, but with someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the courage of the heart. As the wind whispered through the towers, she knew that the story of Eldrath was far from over. New challenges would rise, new shadows would gather, but she was no longer afraid. For the first time, she belonged not to duty, not to fear, but to herself, and to the bond she had forged with the Alpha King, a bond built on trust, courage, and choice. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the night wind, a soft whisper reached her ears, not of fear, not of shadow, but of hope. The kingdom endures, and so does the heart that dares to claim it. Seraphine looked at the Alpha King, and for the first time she smiled without hesitation. She had chosen her path. She had claimed her freedom. And together they would face whatever shadows remained, hand in hand, hearts aligned, and courage unbroken.